Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm Tina Howard. Today we have with us some special guests, a repeat performance, if you will. We have Miss Loretta King and Mr. Bill Chafin. I'm so happy.
Hi there.
Happy y'all are here. Now, you might remember that Mr. Chafin and Miss King were here before, and we talked about history in Hart County, and it was just such a popular segment. A lot of people came to me later and said, we want to hear more from the two of them. So thank you for agreeing to come back and spend some time.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking us.
Well, you may not see this, but we have pictures and documents all over this desk and all behind the camera. And we're hoping to screenshot some of those as we talk through those. We thought today that we might talk a little bit about Veterans Day, since we just observed Veterans Day, and about the history of the military as it pertains to Hart County. So I have experts here. I'm going to be quiet now and let the two of you talk. So, Mr. Bill, start us off. Maybe start with the history of Veterans Day. Do you want to start with that?
Well, I think that's the easiest way and probably the best place to start. On November the 11th, 1918, 11/11/1918, at 11 o'clock in the morning, the two parties in what we know as World War I or the Great War agreed to an armistice, which was the beginning of the end of World War I. Supposedly all shooting stopped. It did in general, all of it on the Western Front anyway. And for the next few years, it was sort of informally observed at that time. And finally, in 1938, Congress adopted that as a federal holiday. Most of the states went along, some did not. But then after World War II, there was, and Korea, really, World War II in Korea, it became the national day of recognizing veterans in general. It's still sometimes called Armistice Day, but it should be called Veterans Day. And it recognizes all veterans as opposed to Memorial Day, which recognizes those who are no longer with us.
So that's the distinction. Veterans Day could be someone who is in the military currently,
yes,
or could be someone who has served in the past.
Generally, active members of the armed services don't refer to themselves as veterans. They're still in.
Oh.
The state of Georgia for a while had something that kind of bothered some of us who like the English language to be used correctly. Their tag, automobile tags, said retired veteran. I'm a veteran, and I am retired, but I'm not retired as a veteran. I'll be a veteran until I die.
Excellent point.
And so that has been changed. But essentially, you have active soldiers, you have retired soldiers, and you have veterans who are not either one now. People who served, they served a limited period of time, and they still recognize them as veterans as they should. We celebrated Monday this year at the middle school and Hart County High School as Veterans Day. Very moving service.
I bet.
And it gives the community a chance to say, we recognize your service. Some served lengthy periods of time, active. Some, like me, I served 2 years active duty and another 28 years in the Army Reserve. So, but I'm still a veteran.
Not a retired veteran, but a veteran.
I'm a retired Army.
Retired Army.
and a veteran.
And a veteran. That's good. That's good distinction to know. Well, I appreciate that history lesson because I don't know that I knew that in depth. And it seems that if Armistice Day was in 1918, then we just, as 2018 rolled, that was 100 years. So yeah, that's interesting.
This was the 100th anniversary of the World War I armistice.
Yes.
And
fantastic.
It's interesting. Some interesting things about World War I, just as an aside, I'd like to mention. Mm-hmm. The American forces, all of them, suffered 116,000 plus casualties in our 1 year, basically, in World War I. Mm. Of those casualties, about 55,000 of them were combat deaths. Most of the rest of them died of Spanish flu. More died of the flu than of a gunshot in World War I.
Wow.
So, but there again, the proximity, the poor hygiene, things like that, helped lead us to that mess.
Wow.
I don't know about you, but I get my flu shot every year.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, you take people who are used to a certain weather and a certain food and shelter, and then you take them out where they don't have shelter and they're exposed to the elements and they're in close quarters with other people. And so when there was disease, it spread quickly, I'm sure.
It did spread quickly, not only over there, but over here.
That's right. That's true.
It was worldwide, a true pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Amazing. And Ms. Loretta, you have some letters. I don't know if you're open to them or if you have something else there. Yes. While we're on World War I, we had soldiers from Hart County, both white and African American soldiers that served from Hart County in World War I. And although we don't have photos with us, right, of those soldiers?
No, I don't have the photos.
But there are some interesting letters if you want to read them.
Very interesting. Mr. Chapin is the expert on the military, but as far as the research, I research and I just enjoy, and it's just so much that I'm learning with this. And I must say before I forget, 2 years ago I received a copy of my granddad's discharge from World War I. So that's really something, and I take pride in having that. But as I was researching for some things, I found these letters that one letter says, "Dear cousin, I am wondering what you are doing today. It is beautiful weather here. We're out on a rest and packing up our clothes to go somewhere. I don't know where. Home, I hope. I never got to the front, was on my way when the war ended," and that was coming from, and it's other things on here, but that was coming from Private Eugene Gray, France, November 23rd, 1918.
Wow.
Another letter.
And he was from this area.
This area. And what I find so interesting, and I didn't know this, but apparently when the families received a letter from their a military soldier that was in the military, they must have taken it to the Hartwell Sun so that the people in Hart County would know how that person was doing. That's the only thing I can imagine.
I was going to ask you where you got those letters, so that answers my question.
The Hartwell Sun.
Interesting.
Here's another one. Albert Aylwine, who is ill with pneumonia in France, writes a short note to his mother, Mrs. Lou Aylwine, in which he says he had a fine Thanksgiving supper. He expected to be out of the hospital, I'm sorry, not military, but out of the hospital soon. And a lady that was Miss Ruth Wheeler was in the American Red Cross and sent a letter to his mom. And then I was very, very surprised to find some letters from African American soldiers. It said letters from our colored soldiers. And this is where three brothers were in the military at one time in World War I. And it was saying, one was France, October 7th, 1918. Dear Father, how are you and the family? Hope you are well. Cooley and myself are getting along all right so far. Hope you're getting along gathering the crops. When have you heard from Mac? Know you miss us. How's Brother Walter and his family? Give our love to all. And that was Everett Harper. And they were from down at the Flat Rock, I guess, Cokesbury area. He and his brother, Mac, as well as Cooley, were in there at the same time.
All three brothers.
All three brothers. And this is one November 12th, 1918. Dear brother, sure was glad to hear from you, and I know that you're getting along so well. I'm getting along fine. Glad to know that, that you're getting along so well with the farm. Oh. This was from Mac, so that was the three brothers on there. But it's just the letters. One man was Gaines, W.H. Gaines, that wrote just a long letter that Mrs. Gaines, so I would assume that's his wife, shared with the newspaper. But he talked about so many things that they did over there. And I think if it was not him, it was another soldier that went to see the castles over there on one of his off days.
Oh, wow.
So it's another gentleman that letter was in the newspaper was from Private Claude S. Cook. Another was from Otto Schultz, and you say he was around the Recreek community. But it's just
it's fascinating.
Fascinating to me, yes.
And you can imagine these people in the 19-teens probably were not widely traveled, so when they were shipped overseas, the things that they saw,
yes,
they wrote home about some of the sights that they saw. That's fascinating and interesting that they printed them in the paper, which is nice. I wish they still did that kind of thing.
Well, in the days of mass communication and quick mass communication, we don't remember sometimes how difficult it was to get word. And one of the stories I like out of World War I was the story of John Morris, who was from the Mount Olivet area of Hart County. He was an officer in the Army in World War I. At the end of World War I, his father didn't know where he was. He didn't know whether he was alive, dead, or what. So he packed a younger son up and sent him to France to find John. And he did, in hospital after the armistice.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
That sounds like a movie.
It would probably make a pretty good movie. And John Morris came back home and practiced law in this town into the 60s, I think.
Wow. That's really neat. Gosh, sent the younger son to look for his older brother.
Yeah.
Send him to France to find his older brother. Wow.
Everybody know the name of the younger son.
Really?
Yeah, Butler Morris.
Morris?
Long-time chairman of the school board here.
Wow. That's something else. Because, if Butler Morris would have had to have been a teenager, wouldn't he?
Probably.
Because if he had been older,
teenager.
he might have been in the war. So maybe he was 18 or 19. Imagine being that age and being sent overseas to find your brother. That's a great story. I love that story. So if somebody's interested in World War I, you got any tips on what, Miss Loretta, you're really good at research.
For World War I would say first start with your family, because a lot of times people
history.
may have family stories. And sometimes you may have to, if it's an older member of your family, you may have to ask them 2 or 3 times, and it will bring something to their memory. Also, the newspaper is very good as far as if it's someone from Hart County. But it's other newspapers from, all over the country. But also, you can Google in, but it does take a lot.
It's needle and haystack, isn't it? You're
It
just
is.
searching.
And one thing I really want to bring one person's name, Freddie Stowers. And he was an African American that was killed in World War I. He was killed October 28th, 1918. He was an African American. I did not know this until 2012 when I was researching and writing the book on my family history, and I was told that he was my granddaddy's first cousin.
Oh.
I asked his niece 3 times, and she said, yes, that is your granddaddy's first cousin. I said, I want to ask you again, but the first George Bush gave the Medal of Honor to the 2 surviving sisters. They are deceased now. In, I believe, 91, somewhere from 91 to 93, they had a ceremony at the White House. But he has beginnings in Hart County. His daddy and grandmother were from Hart County, moved over to Anderson County.
Wow.
That is something.
That's interesting. Have I seen a picture of that? Do you have?
I had a.
We're gonna try to screenshot that in if we can find it. But that
really was
nice.
something that was very good. That we.
That he finally got the recognition.
It took a long time, and several people had to pick it up, and for them to have that. But but when I met some cousins, when they had that ceremony where they did a sculpture on Anderson University campus about 3 or 4 years ago, I met some cousins. They said, we knew we had cousins over in Hart County, we just didn't know them.
Oh, wow. That's nice. So his family's still in Anderson County.
Yes. And
his descendants are in Anderson County. And there's is there a memorial to him at Anderson?
A sculpture at Anderson University.
Of him?
On the library, yes.
Wow.
A lady did a beautiful sculpture, and they've named an army barracks after him, as well as a school. I believe the school is in, not sure if it's Fort Benning, Georgia, but anyway, they've named a school after him also.
How nice. Well, that's really interesting. So we did have a lot of people serving in World War I that were from Hart County, and in Memorial Day, we appreciate the veterans organization putting the wreaths around, not the wreaths, the crosses around the courthouse, and then the wreaths at Christmas on the graves, and that's nice.
Well, there were 18 Hart County soldiers who were killed in France.
I knew you would know that somehow. I just knew.
I just read it off the program, Monday's program.
It's off the program from Monday. So there were 18 killed from Hart County in World War I.
Yes.
Goodness.
Sounds like a roll call too of the prominent families of Hart County when you look at some of the names.
Do you have the names there?
Yep, got a list of them.
Good. Let's read them.
Our school superintendent read these, by the way.
Oh, good.
At the ceremony.
Okay.
John W. Adams, George W. Cason, William J. Connolly, Henry Gaines, Oscar McCurley, Claude Stevenson, Owen J. Alford, Preston B. Carter, Charles P. Dodd, Anderson Harris, Lawrence Nix, Gilbert Thompson, Erskine Allen, Samuel Chapelier, James Estes, John Heaton, George Patterson, Yancey Wilson.
Wow. Thank you for reading that. That's good. That's good that it's on there. Anything else on World War I before we move on to something else? I know that.
There are a number of markers, veterans markers, if you would, cemeteries across. I wish we could get more information. When I was with the Historical Society, we partnered with the high school to do a veterans database. And we got a lot of information, but in many, many cases, all we got was the name, where they served, the rank if they knew it, where they're buried. For instance, these two are in the cemetery at Harmony Grove Baptist Church. both privates in the Army, World War I. Only one that we have the unity served in. He was in Company H of 366th Infantry. If we could get people who know just to get in touch with us and let us know what they know.
So if you had an ancestor that served in World War I, you would appreciate if they would call the Historical Society
Or call me.
or call you.
Yeah.
And you're in the phone book.
Just be careful what you call me.
and tell you what they know about their
Yes.
grandfather, great-grandfather, whatever. Okay. Good. Okay.
And one of these days, these forms will go into an archives of Hart County. First, we've got to have an archives. But we've got all kinds. We got some that are just as simple as this one, with very little in it. We got some that attached all kinds of documentation. Like this was attached to record of service of those 4 individuals.
So that would be good to know if you have any information on your ancestor, if you could forward that to you or the Historical Society for database, because it would be nice to have an archives locally so that you could go and search for information about things. Well, that's good. That's interesting.
And it's great as well for genealogy, because sometimes you have people that come in town to research on their ancestors, and that can be very helpful to them.
Sure. And you mentioned earlier, if you want to research looking at the Hartwell Sun. Hartwell Sun goes back to the late 1800s?
Around 1876 or whatever. That's on the microfiche.
It's on microfiche, and that's ornery to deal with, isn't it?
It is very ornery to deal with,
but it can be done.
It's a lot of things in there, but it just, some people get discouraged if they don't see anything, because you just got to read, have your eye really going through, because you don't really know what you're just looking to see if it's something in there. When I look, I'm not sure what I'm going to find. But sometimes I just see some interesting tidbits. I have what I'm looking for. I'm not seeing it, but it's other things that I'm seeing and I find fascinating.
Yeah, that's good. So you just have to be patient, and it just takes time. Well, good. So after World War I, that settled down, and it wasn't long before we were back in World War II, and the draft was reinstituted, if it ever went away. Do you know if it ever went away between World War I and II? Okay, and then I guess in 1941, maybe after the Pearl Harbor?
It was early, I think 1940 they reinstituted the draft.
1940, okay. And then thousands of young people signed up to be the selective service, and then many were drafted. Some enlisted, but many were drafted into World War II. And so we have a plethora of information on World War II, which is wonderful, because if you think about so many technological advancements between World War I and World War II, such as photography and things like that, and a lot of it is preserved, which is great. And y'all, between the two of you, you have a lot of it. Ms. Loretta's got a lot of it, which is fascinating.
We've got stuff all over the place.
Stuff everywhere. You should see the studio. And Ms. Loretta has done exhibits before. You've had one at the library a couple of years ago, and then you've had one at the city of Bowersville. Is that right? And from time to time, you can be coaxed out and have a little display. But the fascinating, we'll screenshot some of them, but just to be able to see all of the things that you've archived yourself and you've researched is really amazing. Now, there are a lot of pictures, both in the studio and on the desk here, of soldiers that are African American soldiers, and tell us how you came by those pictures.
Okay. These pictures, and I was told by Marion Crawford, I'll have to mention his name when I was talking to him, Ms. Loretta, those pictures were on a wall of honor because they were at Bo Hill's store, and a lot of people would know from the Hills Funeral Home, but they also had a store. I was given just one frame of pictures from Charity, Tony's wife. It's my understanding there were many frames of pictures. I don't know what other people are doing with them, but I have tried to honor this and these men with these pictures. Tommy Hughes was very helpful to me in getting these pictures the way that I have them now. But these pictures were thumbtacked to frames. They would just come up and put a thumbtack in there. So
and who posted the pictures? The soldiers themselves?
Apparently the soldiers themselves must have come up when they were home on leave or whatever and just post the picture. I mean, just put one of their pictures, tack it up there. And I have identified some of these men, but some I'm still trying to identify because this was at a time, that's the only place they did have to place their place they had for their pictures. But it continued not only from World War II on down, Korean War, or whenever someone was in the military, all the way, I guess, until the store closed. They would just come in and put their picture up. And I've had people to tell me, oh, Loretta, I remember those pictures. They were on the wall, and it was just a wall just full of pictures.
Wow. You know, we don't think about putting names to them until we can't remember who they are, which is a shame because you do have a lot of pictures that don't have the names, and you would like very much to put names to these pictures so that you can honor these soldiers.
And I believe, and you always coax me and tell me the things that I can do, but I believe I'm going to have that exhibit again so that people that did miss it would be able to see the various things that I had.
Because they would recognize maybe a family member.
They could. But it's not going to only be just the African-American soldiers. It's going to be the letters from World War I from anyone, and it's different things that anyone in Hart County could come and look and see. I think history is just worth preserving.
I agree with you. And Mr. Bill, we were talking about Sylvene Fleming earlier. Refresh us on who that was.
She was Sylvene Scales. She was the baby girl in the Scales family.
The Scales family,
that sent 4 sons to World War II, 2 of whom were killed. Knox and Enoch did not survive. The 2 brothers did. Sylvene's husband was also a soldier. So out of that family, you really had 5 soldiers who served in World War II, 2 of whom, Knox and Enoch Scales, gave their lives. And I have some information I'd like to share on Knox, on one of the Scales brothers. And it's interesting. Knox Scales was born in October 1916 here in Hart County. He went in the Army, entered military service in June of 1941. That's a little bit before Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. So he enlisted, I take it?
Well, I think he was commissioned from college.
Okay.
Or no, he enlisted. You got to understand, 1941. We had units, reserve units had been called up. Pennsylvania National Guard, for one, was activated after the Germans invaded Poland as a precaution. Nothing done except train. Anyway, Knox ended up Company G of 301st Infantry, which was in the 94th Infantry Division. At the time of his death, he was first lieutenant. He was killed on February the 10th, 1945. He was buried originally in the cemetery in Luxembourg, where General Patton is buried. And then after the war, his body was returned home, and he's currently buried at the Ruhama Methodist Church, which is over near Star, South Carolina.
Okay.
His family were from Hartwell, Hart County, but they came here, and they never. The cemetery at Ruhama was theirs. He was awarded a Silver Star for gallantry. I give you the whole bit, but I would like to just read the citation. And this is one of our own. This is signed by the Adjutant General of the War Department for gallantry in action in Germany on 7 February 1945 during an attack on the strongly defended German town of Sens, Germany. Lieutenant Scales repeatedly distinguished himself by his personal bravery. When 2 of his platoon leaders were wounded and heavy casualties sustained after entering an enemy minefield, courageous lieutenant dashed to the head of the company and, after knocking out 2 enemy machine guns, led a bold charge against the enemy and captured the town. He was killed in later action while personally placing his men in frontline positions. Lieutenant Scales' heroic, aggressive actions and indomitable fighting spirit are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service. And it goes on to say, this decoration will be forwarded to the Commanding General, Force Service Command, Atlanta, Georgia, who will select an officer to make the presentation. And this letter award was sent to his father, G.P. Scales, route to Hartwell, Georgia.
Wow. That's
Nice
amazing.
write-up from the paper. And he followed his brother, Knox, who was killed earlier. This is the kind of information I'd like if we could have this kind of information in detail about every soldier that ever served from Hart County.
Wouldn't that be great?
No. It would be impossible, but it would be great.
Wow.
I guarantee you.
And so it's not just the World War I information you're looking for, it's World War II as well, and all since, everything
today,
since. Korea,
Afghanistan.
Vietnam, Afghanistan,
I've got
present.
things all the way up through 2002,
Okay.
military records
Okay.
of people.
Wow.
Um,
Thank you for
and
reading that.
not just those who were active combat units. We want them all.
Yeah.
Because as John Milton said in his poem on his blindness, they also served who only stood and waited.
That's right.
They wore the
That's
uniform. They were prepared.
Yeah. That's right.
A lot were called, some weren't.
Yeah. You're right. You're right.
So
Miss Loretta, will you explain something? I should have said this before we went into that. That was great. You were the one who told me about Gold Star mothers, 4-star mothers, 5-star mothers. Explain what that is, just in case people need a refresher.
Okay, now the 4- and 5-star moms from World War II, as I was looking into the Hartwell Sun, I found this, and I was actually looking because I was researching for something different. But
And
the
these are
5-star moms are the ones that had 5 sons at one time in World War II.
That's just hard to wrap your head around, that you have 5 sons and they're all serving in
at
the
one
military
time.
at
And then
one
the
time.
4-star moms, they had 4 sons.
4 sons.
And but this is not a complete listing that I have here. And I had someone to tell me that, and I just need people to understand history is ongoing. The research is ongoing. This is where I made a start on this, and I had Peyton Townley to do the calligraphy for me on this, and she did a wonderful job, and this was on my exhibit. Mr. Chafin here was saying with the Gold Star moms, he can tell you about them, but I've just found this fascinating. This was
And just
something I
like-
stumbled up on.
Just like Mr. Bill wants information for the database, you would love to hear if somebody knew of a 4-star, 5-star mom.
That's correct.
Okay, to add to your list.
Yes.
Okay.
Are you aware of where those stars were?
Where
People
they-
had a banner that they hung in the window of their house.
Oh, no, I
One
didn't
star on a red, white, and blue banner.
know. Okay.
One star, one blue star indicated that there was a soldier or someone in service from that household.
So if my son served, one of my sons, I would have a banner that had one star.
Banner, if you wanted it, hang a banner in your window with one star. If that individual were killed or died in service, then they would change the color of the star to gold.
So that's where the gold star comes from.
But you can still, if you're around an antique store sometime, you still see those World War II star banners.
Wow. So I presume if you had 2 sons, there would be 2 stars and 3 and so forth. That's interesting. I did not know that about the banners. But Gold Star Mother means you have lost a son.
Yes, Lord, you've lost a child.
Okay.
And it would be great to find those, and
Yeah.
where we could have them. It's just great, and it's one other thing I'd like to mention is Flat Rock had programs, at least 2, I'm sure more programs, to honor the men in service. The Flat Rock had several men that were in there, but they didn't just only have just Flat Rock community. Other people were invited. I believe Mr. George Rooks was invited, Mr. Louis Mars. This was during World War II. They even had a box supper where they came out, and then the school did a patriotic program. Flat Rock's school did this. We also had Mr. Az Patterson that had a daughter that was the first African-American female, and it was Corporal Audrey Patterson that was from Hart County. She enlisted in, I believe, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. After leaving here, she went north. And I think she trained in Des Moines, Iowa. But I was able to research and find, I had no idea of that. Just happened to see it in the newspaper.
Now, a lot of old timers around Hart County might remember Mr. Az Patterson and his wife Margaret, right?
Yes,
and
that's correct.
Asbury and Margaret Patterson, and their daughter was the first African American female soldier, and she attained the rank of corporal, which is interesting. We don't think about World War II having women.
Yeah.
I'd like to share another one of these database forms with you. The background of this man intrigued me when I read his document the first time. He was actually at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941. His name is Curtis Anchorage. He entered the Army in September of 1940.
So he was another that went in before.
And his daughter wrote this, and said he was born in 1920 as a Pearl Harbor survivor. Only went to about the 8th grade. He was a middle child of 3 boys. He first went to a CC camp in
I don't know
South
what that
Carolina,
means. CC camp.
Civilian Conservation Corps.
Oh,
During the Depression, it was organized in military fashion and sent all over the country to
okay.
do public works.
Okay. I've heard of that. I didn't know what CC meant.
And then he went from South Carolina, he went to Washington State for a period of time. After that, he joined the U.S. Army and was sent to Hawaii with the 11th Field Artillery, stationed at Schofield Barracks on Pearl Harbor Day.
Wow.
Now, here's a guy that he's looking for a job.
Yeah.
And there were a lot that were there. He served until June of 1945. He not only served in Hawaii, but after Hawaii, he was in the European, Africa, Middle Eastern campaign, the American campaign, Asiatic Pacific campaign. He was a rifle marksman and had the World War II Victory Medal. And all of this is available. Thank goodness his daughter knew enough to write us a lengthy, a 2-page story about her dad and the fact that they went to Hawaii to see where he had been. Then just, you know, what these people did deserves that kind of attention.
Remembrance,
Really and truly.
absolutely does. And I remember Mr. Anchorage. He was a kind man, but you would have never, who knew that story? I didn't know that story about him at the time that I knew him.
I knew him too. You never would have said hero with him.
He's so humble. He was so just a nice, kind man. Yeah. So it's really wonderful to have. But as a family member, how would you ever know that anybody's interested enough to want to collect that information? So I'm glad that you're telling people how to do that and where.
Well,
because that matters. That's good. That's good.
I hope we get some interest in doing it.
I hope so too. That would be really wonderful. Miss Loretta, you taught me something right before we started to tape, and that was you had shown me a picture of an African-American soldier, and you said he was a Buffalo Soldier. I never knew. I thought that was some historical conflict. I'm showing my ignorance. But you told me what that means. So explain to that, just in case somebody else doesn't know.
Well, these soldiers were granted permission to serve by the U.S. Congress in 1866, so that was after the Civil War had ended. And the Buffalo Soldiers were in the 9th and 10th Cavalries, and they also fought with great pride in 4 U.S. infantries. And that's with me researching. And of course, Mr. Chafin and I talked about this a couple of years ago, because naturally when I need some information, because he is a history major, I will ask him and we'll talk about it. But the Indians, because of the hair that the soldiers had, the Indians said that their hair reminded them of the hair on the back of a buffalo neck. So they, the Native Americans started calling them.
So the Native Americans named them.
Started calling them the Buffalo Soldiers, as far as what I've been able to research.
That's very interesting. I never knew that. But you also told me that the term Buffalo Soldier wasn't just in 1800s. It was a term, Mr. Bill said that too. It was a term that continued.
It stuck in the U.S. Army with the black regiments. And there were a number of them. The ones that are best known are the 9th and 10th Cavalry.
Okay.
But there were infantry regiments also. And with the integration of the armed services, President Truman, in 1948, there were no more Buffalo Soldier units.
Okay.
So the name is historic now.
Interesting.
But,
See, I did not realize that it had a significance for as long as it did.
Yeah. But now Tommy Lewis Gaines died in Greenville. This was in 2016. But I stumbled upon this with Googling in information and found out that he was actually born in Hartwell, Georgia. I'm trying to get in touch with his son. I hope that I will be able to make contact with him so that we can find out more information. But apparently, possibly his mom, Tommy Lewis Gang's mom, may have left Hartwell after his birth. But it does state that he was actually born here.
And he just passed in 2016. That was recent.
2016. But also, and where I've heard that a Buffalo Soldier was buried here in Hart County, and Mr. George Rooks, from what one lady told me, used to place a flag or something on his grave, and then Mr. Chapin was saying that where he was buried in here in Hart County, and we possibly have more. We just don't know about them.
Yep, I got the story from George.
Okay,
When
George
he was
Rooks.
still running, and he was the one that gave me the information that leads me to believe that there is a Buffalo Soldier buried at New Harmony.
At New Harmony?
At Harmony Grove.
At Harmony Grove. Would this soldier have been before World War II?
Yes, this would have been during those wars that are not recognized by Veterans Day, during the Indian Wars.
Oh. Okay.
He died before the Spanish-American War.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
That was George's understanding.
And so, and he's at Harmony Grove, we think. Probably not marked, or if it was marked, it's no longer there.
I hope there was a military marker at some point. But people don't realize we call it Congressional Medal of Honor, or the Medal of Honor, the highest honor a military man can receive. Started actually in the Civil War, and amongst the Buffalo Soldiers, there were a number that were awarded Congressional Medals of Honor during the Indian Wars. And we just sort of passed them out. I think we're a little bit ashamed of what we did to the Indians. But every time we think about that, think about what they did to 7th Cav, Custer's boys. It was a war. It's hard to separate history from wars.
It is. They're pivotal points often.
Yeah. And I made the statement several times, with the exception of the United States Civil War. The story of wars is generally written by winners. And there were a whole lot of Southern writers who wrote the other side.
But it was another soldier, and I'm trying to research him, that was, I believe his name was either Henry Brown or Willie Brown, that was, it says born in Hart County, Georgia. He was in Puerto Rico. And the war that he was in, I don't know if he would have been a Buffalo Soldier or whatever. I've tried researching, and I'm working on him and trying to see if he's related to someone here. But he would have been in the military back before 1900. I think right at 1900, before 1900, and trying to research some information on him. It is very hard.
So if somebody has that kind of information, it would be the same as what Mr. Bill said, to send it into the Historical Society. If you have any kind of information on who that was.
Because I've gathered the names of a lot of African American soldiers that I've just asked people in passing. People know I'm going to ask them at a funeral, grocery store, wherever. I know they say, here comes Loretta again with this history. But I do have quite a few names as to what Mr. Bill over here is looking for. I have quite a few names. Now is to be able to go back to the family members and ask them to give some information so that their family member can be placed in this. It would be good if people would just not look at this as, okay, they're gone, why do you want to stir this up? But this is so it's interesting, but this would be helpful to teachers. When teachers
sure.
in school teach about the Civil War, they teach about World War I, World War II. Some children are hands-on as far as seeing, not just hearing you, but if they are able to see this, I think this would be wonderful for our Hart County children to actually be able to take a look at this. And who knows, I know out of all these people, some of these children that's at school, it would have to be one of their ancestors.
It would, you're right. You would. And it's one thing to learn about things in a textbook, but when you actually know the people or have heard of the people or know the descendants of the people, it makes it much more personal and much more interesting. And Hart County was proud of its veterans, for sure.
Yes.
There were a number of ceremonies, and I think we tend to forget that now, but Hart County was very involved. I've got some rationing slips somewhere that my grandparents had in the war, and then I found some letters from my dad to his mom and dad, and from them back to him. And in one of the letters, he jokes about his sister, because she had written to him that she was traveling, and he wrote back something like, "How can you expend all that gas ration running all around in the mountains and everything," just teasing her. But this is interesting too. This brings home, my dad made a military diary that I think he shared with you, Miss Loretta, before he passed away. And in his military diary, he talked about when he trained up in Virginia and then was shipped out to Camp Beale in California before he was shipped overseas. And when he arrived at Camp Beale, they went on a train, and when he arrived there, he went into the USO to be told where to go from there and what barracks. And he was looking at newspaper stands, and there was a newspaper, a San Francisco Chronicle newspaper there at Camp Beale, and the headline was, "Tornado rips through Hart County." He could not believe his eyes. In 1944, there was a big tornado that came through and killed a number of people. And so, you know, and it's like Mr. Bill said earlier, when you, in the age of instant communications, you don't think about, he had to write a letter. I think he cabled home asking, "Is everybody okay? What happened?" And then he had this agonizing wait to find out what happened. So that's crazy.
And
You know about knowing somebody and making it different. There is one that I had the good fortune to know. I'll share this with you. Arnold L. Cleveland.
What's the name?
Arnold L. Cleveland.
Arnold L. Cleveland. Okay.
He was a rifleman and a truck driver in Company A of the 12th Infantry Regiment, the 4th Infantry Division in Europe. He wrote his own. I didn't know Arnold well, but I knew him. And he puts in here the awards he got and his experiences. And this was interesting to me. He was in the invasion of Normandy,
Wow.
in the Rhineland campaign, in the Ardennes campaign, in the Central European campaign. You don't know Ardennes, Battle of the Bulge was fought there. His combat duty, he had 5 whole days of combat duty as an infantryman. He went in on the 6th of June in 44, and he was wounded on the 11th of June and sent to the 94th General Hospital in Bristol, England for 5 weeks. Sent back to France on light duty. Made a truck driver out of him. He transported others back and forth, and after the war ended, he drove Germans in his trucks. But having heard him tell stories about that, you know, you think, yeah, he had it good. Getting shot not good, but yeah, in a sense he had, but those trucks, he got a truck because he couldn't march.
Right.
But he was up
Still
there with the
served.
combat troop,
Right up there. Yeah.
working out of a replacement depot.
Yeah. Wow.
And he could tell you some funny stories too. And I actually believe some of them.
And you know, with Douglas Jones, I think he was the first African American postman here. I was able to find where his dad sent a cable. So Douglas' grandfather was Mr. Freeman Jones, and so Douglas' dad sent a cable to Mr. Freeman to say, I've made it safely to Europe, and this was during World War II. And I've got to go back in the newspaper and research to actually take a picture of that little tidbit that was in there. But it's just things like that, like Mr. Chafin said, it just brings it home when it's people that you know, or you know it's from Hart County.
Yeah, it does. It makes it very personal. Very personal. And certainly we don't want to neglect the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Afghanistan, Gulf War, and everything after that. We're still collecting pieces of information, and maybe because that is so much more recent, and a lot of the people who served there that came home are still our peers, and they're out and about. But we start to get nostalgic, I think, when a generation dies out and the information goes with them. Do you know anybody still living? Have you been in contact with anybody?
Mr. Clifford Walker Jones.
I knew
up
there
at
was
Reed
somebody.
Creek.
We talked about him.
I don't know if he's 92, 93. Mine is still very, very good, sharp. He can tell you things, so I possibly need to go just... But it was an article on him in the newspaper at some point where they have that article, I think maybe a year ago. But I need to interview him on World War II. He was in the military during that time. But I just kind of think if we were able to interview some of the World War II veterans that's still alive, to be able to hear some things and to have it archived, I think that would just be wonderful.
Oh, good.
So hopefully we'll be able to, with us being here today, maybe some people will, and it's people out there that are interested, so maybe they just needed to know what to do or who to contact.
And what to do with that interest and where to take that. And the two of you are active in the Historical Society, right?
I'm a member of it.
And
That's me. I'm a member. I'm not very active anymore.
well, but that's still your place. As I guess that's the collection point of a lot of the information that people may have. And then, of course, you will see Miss Loretta and Mr. Bill at the Y, so you can always engage them in conversation about history there.
The hardest thing in the world to get her to talk.
The Y allows me to work there as well as do history. That's what I always tell people.
That's so great, though. It's fun to go over things when we're together and talk about things like this. This has been fun, and the hour always goes by too quickly. This has been fun, and I do hope that you'll come back again another time, because I know I will have people ask me to ask you back. So please think about it. And we've got some great screenshots that we're going to show. Thanks to Ms. Loretta's got all these wonderful pictures. And if you see people without names, it may be because she needs those names. So if you recognize people, please let someone know. And Ms. Loretta's at the Y, or you can let the Historical Society know, hey, I knew that person that was in the military. I'd like to attach the name to the face. That would be very helpful. So good. And then if you have an exhibit, I'm sure you'll let everybody know. And I hope that you do. And it's so good to be with you again. And thanks so much for coming back on with us.
Thank you.
We enjoyed
Like I said before, this has been fun.
I enjoy it.
Me too. Me too. And thanks, everybody. We appreciate you watching, and appreciate Wes Bailey directing, and HeartCom letting us come on here and just have fun. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.